You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
So Microsoft announced Windows Recall earlier this year, and if you're anything like me that has even a passing interest in cybersecurity or where your data goes, you probably hate it just as much as the rest of the internet does. For the uninitiated, Windows Recall is a feature where your computer will be taking screenshots of what is on your screen every 5 seconds or so, and then taking these screenshots and feeding them into an AI processor on your machine to be able to answer questions you ask your device about the things you've been doing. Where the issue lies is in the fact that it is constantly running and includes everything you do, including private things like inputting banking information or your passwords. Everything, of course, except for streaming services or other DRM-protected content, as that's somehow more protected than social security numbers or bank passwords in the year 2024. This was my moment of realization that Windows is far and away no longer what it used to be back in the days of XP or Windows 95 and 98. I could accept the ads everywhere because I knew how to hide them. I could disable most of the telemetry that you could without completely disabling features. But to have your machine take screenshots of what you're doing every 5 seconds to feed into this AI processing is just too far. This topic deserves its own video, of course, but I felt the need to include it as it was a stepping point for many, including myself, into the wonderful world of Linux. Before we get too far into the guide, I just have 2 things I need to get out of the way first. Computer operating systems are akin to my Roman Empire at this point, so we're getting this bit out of the way first. Glad that's out of the way. Anyway, I have one other thing to share as essentially boilerplate disclaimer about the content of this video. The content you are about to see here comes as is, with no warranty from its use. Installing operating systems, if done incorrectly, can cause data loss for your system. Please ensure you have solid backups of any and all data on your machine before proceeding with this guide. By continuing with the video, you agree that you both A, have some idea of what you're doing, and B, agree that if something goes wrong, I am at no fault to you and that you have been warned ahead of time. This serves as your one and only warning. So why should you follow this guide? I'd say I know a fair amount of Linux, having used it for years both personally as well as professionally. After also switching my system over a few months ago, I can confidently say I am not going back to running only Windows. I only really have it for specific applications and needs at this point, as Linux does everything else I use my PC for, but just better in every way. For gaming specifically, it's a completely fine replacement. Every game I've thrown at it has just worked. The one thing that doesn't is anything with a kernel level anti-cheat inside of it. Thus, this guide is going to be dual boot focused with an emphasis on setting it up for gaming. That's not to say Linux is only good for gaming either, it's a fully fledged operating system after all. Just about any other program you would use for Windows has either a Linux native version or an alternative that does the exact same thing. We'll be covering all of this and more throughout the video, so without any further ado, let's begin on our journey to a better system together.
Developers, 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 developers. Developers, 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 developers. Yes!
So to start on our journey into the world of Linux, we need to determine a few things, notably which distribution you wanted to use. That's right, there's 1,000,001 different versions of Linux, known as distributions, that each have their own advantages and drawbacks. Some are more user-friendly for beginners, such as Linux Mint. Others are geared for power users like Arch or Gen 2, and others still are in between for all kinds of different computers. Raspberry Pi, a popular hobbyist computing device, is a perfect example of a Linux-based device. It, along with the Steam Deck, have paved the way for more consumer-grade Linux hardware solutions. Picking which distribution to use can be an important decision, of course, so there are plenty of websites to go and learn about each of them. A good example of one is known as DistroWatch. This site can show you the different pros and cons for each distribution, so you can make an informed decision on which one to use. You can also utilize YouTube videos, such as the one you are watching right now, to make these informed decisions based on other people's experiences running different distributions. My personal recommendation for someone just starting out would be Linux Mint, as it's the most user-friendly experience that is closest to Windows that I've found. For this video, though, I will be installing Ubuntu, but luckily for us, the installation, setup, and overall system experience is the exact same as with Linux Mint. Reason being, distributions like Linux Mint, Ubuntu, Kubuntu, and others are all based on a base Linux system known as Debian Linux. Another key step in our journey is ensuring your hardware is up to the task. The last thing you'd want is to install an operating system only to find it fails to load even the most basic of programs without screaming in a panic, or even at all. Fortunately, since Linux itself has been in development for literal decades now, hardware compatibility is mostly a non-issue. Of course, there will always be fringe cases with some out-there hardware, but fortunately, that is where Linux's basic strength lies. Enter the Live CD, your one-stop shop for pre-installation. Want to test the OS to see if it would work with your system? Live CD. Want to preview how the OS looks and feels before deciding that's the one you're going with? Live CD. Need to fix a major issue that prevents Linux from loading? You guessed it, the Live CD. Even better, this is just the install disk you get to use as well. Imagine if Windows had a try before you buy feature like this. We'll be touching on live CDs a bit later on, as they can be really powerful tools to both use for and installing Linux, and to have as just a rescue tool in the event of system failure. So we verified our hardware is good and will work with Linux, but what about all the programs we run? As cool of an operating system as I think Linux is, half of its charm and use comes with the programs it runs. While I can't promise everything has a stable Linux version, there are ways around this nowadays via compatibility layers. A great one that I, again, have no issues with is known as Wine, short for Wine is not an emulator. This program offers a way for Windows executables to run on Linux with fairly good results. For those of you, like me, who want to take a more methodical approach to dual booting with Linux, I recommend making a list of all of your software and go down the line. I've linked a template of the one I've created down in the description that's helped me a lot. Determining if a program can run on Linux either via Wine or natively, if there's alternative options available, or if you're required to use Windows, is the key to getting the most out of your dual boot experience. Any game that uses kernel-level anti-cheat, for example, will need to exclusively run on Windows, as by design, Linux does not like programs having complete and full access to your system at that kind of level. And let's be honest, I don't either. At the end of the day, this is your make or break in terms of, do I dual boot or go all in? At least for me, the writing was on the wall with games like Fortnite that require anti-cheat options, as well as Windows Hyper-V Manager for my servers. The final piece of the puzzle to touch on is what to do with all your data. It's no surprise that installing an operating system will wipe away the drive and start from scratch. That's why it's so important to have a plan to move your data. Whether you have one hard drive or many, NTFS as a file system is severely lacking on Linux. My honest recommendation for the smoothest, least headache experience is to get yourself an external hard drive and move your personal data, such as your pictures, documents, music, etc., to that external drive as your backup. Then, once Linux is installed, just move everything back. After this, you'd be free to delete everything off that drive. Alternatively, if you're going for a dual boot configuration, you can mount both drives side by side and do the file transfer that way. This is because Linux has enough NTFS support to handle mounting the drive and gathering the data, so long as it's not encrypted via BitLocker or other third-party means. So at this point, you're probably wondering to yourself, if not NTFS, then what? The best answer I have is it depends on which OS you're installing. Some distributions of Linux prefer one file system over the other. A majority of them, however, utilize the ext journaling file system. Debian-based Linux distributions are a prime example of this. ext4 is a solid, stable file system and is widely regarded to as the standard. Now that we've covered just about everything in terms of preparation for installing Linux, we can take a deeper dive into the actual installation process. So to begin on our lovely journey into the world of Linux, the first step we have to do is we need to prepare our live CD boot disk. And to do that, usually I use a program known as Rufus. It's right here. You can download Rufus by going to the following web address, rufus.ie/en, or you could just do a simple Google search. And what you're going to want to do is, I prefer to download the portable version of Rufus because everything's all kind of self-contained there and it won't run any kind of installer. It just runs on its own. Now, when Rufus first opens, it will give you a couple of options that you can follow here. I do already have a flash drive plugged into my machine, so it auto-detected it right here. Usually I would recommend just having the flash drive in before you start, as that will then auto-detect right there. And if you have multiple drives plugged into your machine, like an external hard drive for your backups or things of that nature, just be careful which one you're selecting so you don't accidentally overwrite your backups. All right, so next up with the boot selection here, where it's asking for a disk or ISO image, this is just asking if you want to, what OS you would want to use to boot into this. So you have MS-DOS or FreeDOS. I personally wouldn't recommend these unless you're making a DOS machine, obviously. So in most cases, you're going to use the disk or ISO image. And then over here, you're going to go here and hit select, where you're going to then try to find your ISO image. So thankfully, I already do have the Ubuntu disk image that we are going to use here. So next up here, the partition scheme. For this, at this point, in this day and age, most computers are running UEFI anyway, so you'd be better off changing the partition scheme to GPT and then have the target system be a UEFI system. Don't worry about the drive properties or partition size. These are best kept as default, just because you don't really want to mess with these, or else you may make your system non-bootable if you mess with it too much. So this next part for format options, this is specific to your drive that you have. So in this case, this is the label it'll use. For file system, keep it FAT32, especially if you're using Linux. FAT32 will boot anything. So yeah, all of that should be good. So basically, once you select your ISO and change your partition to GPT, you're set to go. So then you can go down here and hit start, and then you'll get this pop-up here. In my experience, when you receive this pop-up, I would just write it in DD image mode, because in my experience with booting several Linux distributions is a lot of times they won't boot if they're not done in DD image mode. So definitely use write in DD image mode. I know it's not the recommended option, but definitely do this because in my experience, Linux has a lot easier time booting when it's written in DD image mode. Okay, so again, you'll just hit OK, and then it will kind of run through here, and it'll give you this warning as well, saying that everything that's on your drive is going to be destroyed. So then once you're sure, you'd hit OK, and it'll go ahead and write the image. All right, so at this point, our flash drive is done here, so we are good to go. So you can go ahead and actually just close out of Rufus, and that's all we really need to do for preparing a drive for Linux.
And now, our feature presentation.
Here we are at our lovely Windows 10 VM that we're going to be using to dual boot Linux, using that same drive that we used with Rufus earlier. I'm doing this in a virtual machine just because of the fact that I need to be able to capture the footage. So bear in mind that I'll be using a virtual machine for this, so your process for at least booting the ISO may be slightly similar or very different. So just bear that in mind. So anyway, without further ado, we'll begin here by first inserting our Ubuntu install disk here. All right. So now that we have our install disk inserted, we'll go ahead and just reboot the machine here and boot into our Ubuntu Live CD. Alright, so now that we've booted into our live CD here, we get a couple of options right from the get-go here. We can either try Ubuntu, which would just boot us into the OS present on the live CD, or we have the option to just install Ubuntu right from the get-go. So real quick, first I do want to just try Ubuntu here real quick without making any changes. It just runs it directly from the CD, just so I can showcase off some of the features that the live CD does give you. So we'll just give that a moment to boot up. All right, and it looks as though we're all booted up and working. So as you can see here, it's booted us into the typical desktop you would see for installing Ubuntu right out of the gate. You have your sidebar shortcuts here, as well as your main icon on the desktop here for just installing Ubuntu. So basically it's when you're ready and you know that you're good to install Ubuntu, you can just double click this to start the install process. Yeah, so down here in the corner you can see you have all of your applications here present. So a lot of these are mainly utilities that are present on the live CD to allow you to do any kind of editing or any kind of repair work to your system, as well as kind of give you an idea of like some of the pre-installed programs that you'll get. So like, for example, you can just play Minesweeper just straight off of the live CD if you wanted to. Not sure why you would, but it's there. So for now, we're just going to run the install disk here. Okay, so now we're at the install screen for Ubuntu. So if you're following along with this guide as kind of an installation for Linux, this will be kind of where you're going to want to start the install process. This is good for either doing a dual boot setup like I'm about to show you here, or if you're just installing Linux only, feel free to follow along with these instructions as well, as it's basically the same exact process. So yeah, first off, you'll see this like little welcome screen here where you can select your different language options. So in this case, we're just going to stick with English here. So we'll continue on. And again, you'll pick your keyboard layout, and usually it detects your keyboard automatically. And then if not, you can hit this detect keyboard layout down here, and it'll try to auto detect a different one, or you can just manually select it. So again, we can just hit continue on this. All right, and then this is the kind of main page where you're going to start picking your different options for actual installation. So for example here, you have either your choice of normal installation or a minimal installation. Typically, I pick minimal installation just because I know kind of what programs I'd need for whatever install I'm doing. But for a normal user, this comes with your web browser utilities, and then it comes with additionally Office software, games, and other media players pre-installed. So it kind of gives you the full package of everything. So your normal user will go with the normal install. And another thing to note for these is that normal Debian distributions of Linux all kind of use this same exact install process since it is based in Debian. So even if you're using, say, Linux Mint, for example, or any of the forks of Ubuntu, such as Kubuntu, this will be the exact same process with the same kind of options and things to do for the install. So no matter what distribution of Linux you're using, you can follow along to this guide, and it should help you along for the most part. And then down here for other options, this is not connected to the internet, so this option is grayed out for downloading updates while installing. And then additionally, this secondary one, the installing third-party software, this is mainly just other proprietary drivers. I highly recommend that you do tick this box, especially if you're running this on a PC running an NVIDIA graphics card, as I do know the NVIDIA drivers are kind of separate to everything else. So definitely tick this box. It's very... This will save you in the long run a lot of headaches. So we'll continue on. Okay, so this is the real big decisions, as Bob Ross would put it. This is the big decisions page. This is how you're going to install the OS. So for instance, our VM auto-detected that it had Windows 10 on it already, so it's giving us the option that if we want to install Ubuntu alongside of it, which would be, in this case, the dual boot configuration. So we're going to pick this one, but I'm also going to go through some of the other options here. So for example, this one right here, erase the disk and install Ubuntu. This does just a full wipe of your drive and then completely installs Ubuntu over it. In doing so, it does reformat and repartition the drive for ext4. So then you're able to encrypt it as well as use logical volume management. These are kind of more higher level things, so your basic day-to-day user may not need to know how to do these or even use these. So you definitely, my recommendation to you would be to leave these unchecked for now, and then you can always set it up again later if you choose to do so, especially for encryption. I would definitely save that for later. Don't do it while you're installing the OS, just because in case you somehow lose your key or anything, then you wouldn't be able to get back into the system you just installed. So again, in that case, we'll just we'll switch it back to this option here, which does not allow us to do either of these two things because we do have NTFS partitions then would still be present on the hard disk we're installing too. And then additionally, down here we have the something else, which this is if you wanted to, for example, manually partition your hard drive and create those different volumes manually for yourself. This is reserved for people who know what they're doing with Linux. or people that specifically want to have like larger swap spaces, which for a general installation, you're never going to want to do this, especially if you don't necessarily know what all of your partitions need to be set for. So this is mainly also here for legacy purposes, because I do know in earlier versions of Linux, a lot of the installs were very manual processes that didn't have kind of this auto-attended install. So we're going to just go ahead and install alongside Windows 10, keep it as is, and go from there. So here is where we pick our option for what drive we want to use. So in this case, since this is a virtual machine, we only have the one virtual hard disk that we'll select here. And then since we're installing this alongside Windows 10, we do have this little slider here where we can pick how big of our hard drive we want to be dedicated to Windows versus Ubuntu. So in this case, since this is just a virtual machine of mine that I'm using, this doesn't matter. But for you, for the sake of the people watching this video, to set up a dual boot system, this comes down to personal preference in terms of, do you want Windows to have more space or less versus your Linux partition. At least for my sake, for when I did this setup myself, I shrank it down pretty intensely. I think I left it half and half, but I've since shrunk my Windows install down as low as I can get it, and then extended the Linux partition of the system that I'm running. So it honestly just depends on how much space you want to allocate to it. So for this VM demonstration, we're just going to go ahead and get it 100 gigabytes for Ubuntu, and then the rest of the space would go to the Windows partition. Because more than likely, at least for this VM, I'm not going to be booting into Windows much more. So yep, once you've decided your partition allocation here for your space, you then get this nice Install Now button right here. So we'll go ahead and install now. And then again, right before you can continue, it gives you this confirmation that any changes that you've selected are going to be written to the disk, and then that's about it. And the resize is going to take a while, so that's totally okay. So we'll go ahead and hit continue, but this is your last chance, point of no return, for going back and making any changes. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and hit continue. And again, one more confirmation, your last chance. No going back after this. Hit continue again. And then there you go. So the nice thing about Linux installs is it'll present you these options for setting up your basic user account and what's known as the locale, otherwise known as your date, time, and region settings, for a Linux term. But while this is all happening, in the background, Linux is installing to your system and getting everything set up in the background, which is really nice. And I wish Windows did that. Right, so for here, this is going to be prompting you for some of your user information here, so as well. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and input our name and computer name. And again, since you put your name in there, it does give you your computer's name automatically. Typically what it is it's just the name that you gave it and then whatever model of machine you have. And then it gives you an auto-filled username based on the name that you input up here. So then, again, it then asks you for a password and to confirm a password. Now, the reason why you are forced, in this case, to input a password is because this account is going to be created with administrative privileges, as well as given sudo privileges. Now, what does sudo mean? We'll talk more about that later, but for now, you can think of sudo privileges as effectively granting you root access to your system so you can do just about anything you would want to the system. So in this case, it does require a password. So in this case, we're just going to give it a kind of short, sweet, simple password, and we do want it to log in automatically because, again, we're just going to go through the motions of using this as a VM for our guide here. So yep, we'll hit continue, and then there you go. You can see that it's still copying files, and it does give you a nice little slideshow of features here as well. This shows off the Software Center and the Snap Store, which we'll go over this once we are set up in our VM as well. Again, more stuff like that. And then additionally, you can expand this down to see all of the different console output that's happening, which if you're a nerd like me, you love watching this just to see what all the system is doing. And that's the nice thing about Linux, is that it is very upfront with what it does to your system. So if we can see here, the installation here is finished. We can go ahead and continue testing Ubuntu now, but any changes that we would make to the live CD get permanently wiped, as this is a disk effectively, so no changes are saved. So in this case, we'll just go ahead and restart now to restart into, hopefully, a boot menu to then be able to boot into Ubuntu. We'll get a prompt to reboot remove our installation media and press enter. So I've gone ahead and ejected the disk, and now we are booting. All right, so as you can tell here, this is the grub menu. So what that is this is effectively your boot menu, where you get the choice of picking which operating system you would want to boot into. So of course the top option is always going to be Ubuntu, but then also, as you can see, it did automatically add our Windows 10 installation to the boot menu here. You can change the boot options in Grub here as well, and kind of move Windows 10 up higher if you wanted to, or to get rid of the countdown. There's a couple of different utilities you can run that allow you to edit Grub, or you can even edit it manually in the terminal if you so choose to. I prefer using the UI apps for that, as it does make all those changes and it does them properly, and there's kind of less chance for error, because if you do mess up your grub menu, your system may not be fully bootable. So in that case, be very careful when you're making changes to this. So again, we're going to go ahead and boot into Ubuntu here. And there we go. We now have a working Ubuntu system. Congratulations, you have officially installed Linux.
What do we do now? What do you mean? Now we can find the...
Run Linux.
Oh yeah.
Like any good OS, Linux serves us as a blank slate or a kickoff point for making it our own. We'll get to the good stuff later, trust me. But for now, we have some things to make sure we have working first to get the most out of our system. Next on our list of things we need to do, applications. There are a few different ways to get this done that mostly depend on the program you're trying to install. Some of them have all three ways of installing, and some only have one. For most beginners to Linux, I'd suggest to use the built-in software package manager for your distribution. On Debian-based systems, this will be the software store. On Arch-based installs, this is something like Octopi. These software storefronts make installing programs a breeze. Be warned, however, that at times it may not be the most updated build of the program, so it depends on what the developer of your application recommends for installation. In these instances, Google is your friend for determining how best to install some programs. You may, in your research, come across a program that needs to be unzipped and rammed from a folder. This is another way to install programs, and it works because everything in Linux is a file on your hard drive. Your RAM, it's a file. A random flash drive you have plugged in, that's a file too. Even your mouse and keyboard are technically notated in open files. The real kicker with this concept is where in your hard drive these files are stored. It's through this that Linux operates, so be careful exploring your drive. You never know if that random file you're going to delete is what you want, or something far worse than that. The other and most common method for installing new software on your device deserves its own part due to its complexity. A key integral part of Linux is the fact that you are in total control of your system with the right commands. And the place those commands are dictated, like a wizard casting incantations, is the terminal. The Linux terminal. By and large, my favorite thing about the operating system. Want to relive your days of entering commands on a screen like we did in the MS-DOS days? That's about the best descriptor I can give for the terminal. There's going to be a lot to unpack with this one, but let's start with some of the basics. So when you first get an Ubuntu system, the first thing you should always do is run updates on it in case if there are updated packages or files needed for your distribution. So I ran two commands in the terminal, and I will show them on screen right now for you. You'll run them in order, and then those two commands you'll run in the terminal to install updates. Alternatively, and as we can already see, we have a system problem down there, so we're going to go ahead and just cancel that for right now while this continues to do its thing. You can also run updates through the settings app. There should be, I believe there's a software update program that you can run as well that kind of does the same thing, but the faster way to do it is running updates in the terminal. And at the same time, our updates finished via the terminal, which is great. Really quickly show you how to open up a file in the terminal. I won't make any changes to it, but just to show you kind of the workflow of that. So for this, we're going to just do sudo, which sudo is the first part of any real Linux command that you would run in the terminal to do anything related to the system. This is to effectively have you run the command as the root user. So every time you run a command using sudo, you'll have to authenticate using your password. And then once you've done that, then it will launch the program as the root user, or in this case, admin account. And then Nano is going to be your built-in text editor for your terminal session as well. You can alternatively use another program called Vim or VIM. That is another text-based editor that runs within the terminal. Each of one of them kind of run the same but have their own different quirks and ways to make edits and keyboard commands and such. One of the common Linux memes, of course, is learning how to exit Vim. Because nobody seems to know how to do that. So for just starting out, Nano will be probably your go-to, but if you ever do end up using Vim, go ahead and feel free. But in this case, we'll just use Nano. And then in this case, then after that, we'll be using the file path for the file we're looking to edit. So in this case, it will be /etc default and then grub. So again, as you see, it's asking for the password. And then here we are. This is the grub configuration file. We don't really need to look at any of this right now. It's just kind of the different grub options as well here. So yeah. And then when you're in Nano as well, to exit, you would just hit Control and then X for exit. To save the file, you would do Control O for write out, and then it will prompt you for your file name. You'd enter the file name, and then you could write out and exit using that Control X key as well. Okay, so the next thing that I would want to show you in the terminal is how to install software, and then we're actually going to kill two birds with one stone with this one, because the software that we're going to install is actually going to be a different desktop environment. I've got nothing against Ubuntu's default GNOME desktop environment, but especially if you're using a dual booted system and if this is your first time using Linux, you'd probably want to have a desktop environment that closely matches Windows. Now, what do I mean by a desktop environment? You're probably asking. A desktop environment is basically a just general look and feel for the operating system that you're running. So in this case, this is the GNOME desktop environment. That's why you have all your programs alongside here, and then why each application runs kind of similar to how like Mac OS operates, for example. KDE is a popular one as well, and then the one that Linux Mint runs, or at least the last time I've checked, runs is called Cinnamon. So in that case, we're going to install Cinnamon right now. So again, to install programs, you're going to do sudo and then apt. apt is the package manager built into Ubuntu. There's a couple of different package managers based on your distribution. I do know that for Arch Linux, that's going to be referred to as Pacman. They each have their own separate kind of command line options and different ways that you run the command. So definitely utilize the built-in documentation that's on the Linux system, which you can access. Actually, I can show that now. You can access your built-in documentation by doing man, for short for manual, and then the name of your command. So in this case, I'm going to pull up the manual page for apt, and here you go. You get a couple of just a full readout of the documentation here, and then you can just use the page up and page down features to change which page you would use. And then it gives you all the different options, as well as gives you just kind of their general usage as well. So that would be how to pull up manual pages. And if you don't prefer to read from a terminal line, you absolutely could just search up the actual command itself in your popular search engines. And there's 1,000,001 different documentation pages that go through and explain how to do things. Alternatively, at least I found the best way to learn how to do stuff in Linux is simply just type what you want to do and then put Linux at the end of it. And there's probably been someone in past who's wanted to do what you've also wanted to do. So sudo apt install cinnamon. And then as you can see, it's going to be installing a lot of different packages here, all to run cinnamon. And again, it prompts you after the operation, about 200 megs of additional space will be used. And then if you want to continue, you just hit yes. Alternatively, when you run the install command, if you add a space after the name of your package, and then the hyphen, and then the letter Y, that is the command flag to automatically accept that prompt and to just continue on. And you can also do that as well when you're doing a sudo apt upgrade for installing updates as well. So we're just going to go ahead and let this run for a bit, and then we'll be right back. It's already over halfway done, as you can tell. There wasn't a whole lot to do for this, so we'll just kind of let this sit, and hopefully once it's finished here in about 5 seconds, we'll go ahead and... Alright, as you can tell, we've finished installing the Cinnamon desktop environment. Now your next question is probably, well, why didn't it automatically change? That's because our currently logged in session is still going to be using that GNOME desktop environment. We would have to log out and then change over our desktop session. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and go up to this arrow icon up in the corner here. I believe we can click our username. Yep, that's correct. And then you'll see this log out button. You just select that. It'll go ahead and log you out. So now what we'll do is when you select your user icon at the top here, it will then give you your prompt for your password. You're going to collect this gear icon right next to the sign in button, and this is where you get to select your option for what desktop environment you want. So you have Ubuntu, which is the default GNOME desktop environment, and since we've just installed Cinnamon, we can just select Cinnamon right here. And so now whenever we sign in, we will instead load the Cinnamon desktop environment rather than GNOME. So this is the Cinnamon desktop environment, and as you can tell, since I'm running this in a virtual machine, it's running in software rendering mode, so it's going to spike the CPU a lot, but that's okay. So yeah, as you can tell, it very closely resembles, or at least for the most part resembles, Microsoft Windows, at least kind of the Windows 7 start menu experience here. So that's kind of the main biggest way you can customize your Linux environment here, is using different desktop environments. As you can see that they're very, very much a complete change over, even more than just doing general kind of theming or personalization options. So speaking of theming, we're going to go ahead and actually look at some of the customization options offered by Linux. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the themes. So, for example, we have a couple of different built-in options for us here. That's fine. So, again, you can change everything. So, anything you see in Linux, you can change. So, for example, your window borders, you can change to something else. Any kind of iconography in your system. Same with all the buttons and your mouse pointer. You can change just about anything in Linux, but if for whatever reason the options that it gives you still don't necessarily like, there are plenty of other fan-created or made by the community options here and under the Add Remove button. So of course, you can completely change your theme here to be something else. Yep, so instead we've changed our desktop over to that new theme. So again, to add a new theme, you would go to Add Remove here. You would find a theme maybe that you'd like, so just find one. And then you would just click over here to install that theme. Once the theme installs, which as you could tell from before, installed very quickly, you could then go back to the themes button, and then it should appear down under the desktop as well, and you can pick the different options available to you. So that's the general theme changes. So real quick, we're going to go over some system settings as well here. So each one of these is pretty self-explanatory for what they are for, obviously. So for this case, backgrounds is just backgrounds. So we can go ahead and pick our background as well. We're going to change that just so we're not looking at a blank screen there. So yeah, as you can see, customizing Linux is a lot simpler than you thought it was. They've made it pretty user-friendly, I would say, at this point, to allow people to be able to change whatever they want with the system. So again, we have different mouse options, mouse and touchpad options as well. So you just go through the system settings window here and just kind of go through, and you can find settings for just about everything that you would want to do. And then for the most part, if there's something that's not in system settings, just Google searches your friends. You can just search in Google what you want to do and see if it's something that's possible in Linux, and if so, usually there's step-by-step instructions in what you would need to do to accomplish that. So now we have a fully fledged Linux and Windows operating system under our belt. What is there left to do?
Huh?
What I mean by that is you can do just about anything. It's Linux. Install some apps, find a desktop environment that works for you and how you work, break the whole thing and fix it. The possibilities are endless. Hey everyone, Jacob over in the editing booth right now. It is 9 o'clock the night before upload. I just wanted to take a beat and thank you all for watching this video. I know it took me quite a long time to produce. I actually had this on the docket for several months and just kind of sat on it, mainly because I was a little nervous and scared that it wouldn't do well. But at this point, I just don't care anymore. If it does well, great. If it doesn't, whatever, I tried. But that's not the main reason I'm here. The main reason I'm here is actually to tell you about this hot new podcast I'm going to be doing called the UltraGameBros. It's with my buddy Ryan and a bunch of my other friends. It's basically just a group of us all sitting together talking about our favorite games. And it's going to come out twice a month, so be on the lookout for that. I linked down below in the description for you for viewing that. Other than that, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing. See ya.
What a huge hassle.
Yeah.